former 5 years. This, of course, is affecting young Latino males in great numbers since 1996. Under this law, Section 287G established a program to allow designated state and local law enforcement officers to enforce federal immigration functions. Since 9/11, this program expanded exponentially into the federal Secure Communities program, which led to increasing numbers of deportations under the Obama administration, a record-breaking 2 million deportations in 6 years. The deportation system is repeatedly justified on both sides of the aisle by the assumption that deportation is a necessary and adequate measure to combat crime. Miguel, Rogelio, Luis Manuel, Edgar, Johnny, and Luis were each deported after a criminal conviction, for which several of them served at least 1 year in a state or federal prison in the United States. These are not the voices of hardened criminals who deserve and legitimize deportation to a country they barely remember. Rather, they are the frontline victims of a broken immigration and criminal justice system that mandates punishment, exile, and banishment instead of social inclusion, help, and healing. On the other end of the distorted continuum of immigrant and criminal, we hear from the articulate voices of deported graduates without a criminal record. According to public statements by the Obama administration that explicitly direct immigration enforcement officers to prioritize convicted criminals, there should not be a single deported young person who is in good standing with U.S. law. This is clearly not the case. Azul, Valeria, Moises, Adriana, and Nancy were deported after minor infractions. Sometimes the deportation order was a result of contact with local police for mistakes that would lead to a fine, community service, or a hard lesson learned for their U.S. citizen friends, speeding tickets, underage drinking, shoplifting. For others, it was the daily reality they had lived with since childhood, not having legally approved immigration papers that led to their forced expulsion. Living with the fear of deportation can haunt undocumented youth and their families every time they walk out their front door in the U.S. The tension between their ambitions and the obstacles they face because of the lack of regularized immigration papers has led a surprising number of youth to make the difficult decision to move to Mexico. Others traveled with family members who had been deported. Still others returned upon the less than forthright advice of immigration lawyers who suggested to them that by leaving before their 18th birthday, they could avoid legal penalties and more easily return to the U.S. with a legal visa. This advice has proven to be a painful deception for many. In the following pages, Patricia, Jacqueline, Rufino, Maria, Samantha, Pamela, Jessica, Maggie, Saul, Pedro, Hector, Rafael, Virginia, Claudia, and Daniel describe the process of making the life-altering decision to cross the border. Again, romantic and idealistic perceptions of what these young people may find upon return are quickly replaced by painful experiences of discrimination, bureaucratic frustration, cultural shock, unjust employment standards, lack of economic opportunity, unforeseen obstacles to a university education, as well as increased vulnerability and violence. And yet, several of the testimonios in this book insist upon claiming that daily reality as their own. Having grown up on a steady diet of the U.S. American dream, these young people recognize both the advantages and the false promises of that dream for them and their families. They are articulate about their intentions to build their dreams in Mexico, in the United States someday, or even beyond the limits of any national border altogether. Upon return to the country of their birth, however, too many of the Otros Dreamers find themselves undocumented in Mexico also. Given the evidence of the overwhelming positive effects of university enrollment, it is especially concerning that many of those who want to continue their higher education in Mexico are frustrated by a lack of officially approved papers. The Secretaría de Educación Pública, or the SEP, is the government entity currently responsible for the revalidation or acceptance as valid and legal of all foreign education documents in Mexico. In order To revalidate, returning and deported youth must submit transcripts and diplomas from their U.S. high school, middle school, and elementary education with an international apostille from the home state in the United States, which is international apostille is based on the Hague Treaty, which is over 100 years old, and through this special stamp you get from the Secretary of State, you can travel with these international documents. And a costly official translation, even though all these youth are clearly bilingual and could do it themselves. They have to pay for the official government translation. Many describe calling their former schools in the U.S. and being told that they must sign for the documents in person, salt in the wound of banishment. Without a transnational support network, financial resources, resolve in the face of the strange government bureaucracy that often seems impenetrable, and a bit of luck, too many returning and deported youth are confronted with the disconcerting realization, in the words of Rufino, I can't study over here and I can't study over there. The Mexican government's inadequate response to its returning and deported citizens exacerbates an already deeply challenging experience. Since 2012, of the over 50 young people with whom I have had extended conversations, 100% have described periods of depression. The cultural shock and feelings of alienation and dislocation are the most obvious traumatic situations that these youth confront. Painful separation from loved ones in the U.S. also affects the emotional health of them, many who have not seen family members in years and who do not know if they will ever see family members again. Too many also return bearing the burdens of human rights violations experienced in immigration detention centers and deportation. One young man describes handcuffs and chains on his ankles on the doorstep of his parents' home. A young woman experienced 4 strip searches in less than 24 hours while detained under secure communities. Another young woman cannot forget the total fear of running across the international bridge for her life at 3 in the morning, not daring to look back. Finally, the challenges these youth face upon return are similar to the challenges most Mexican youth face, regardless of their migration experience. To name a few, adequate employment opportunities that pay a living wage, alternatives to organized crime on the border and in rural communities, safety and stability in areas plagued by violence, and gender and sexual equality. Their vulnerability upon return, often without a support network of family and friends, results in more acute obstacles that are nevertheless shared across a generation. Furthermore, social and cultural formation in U.S. economic and social norms results in remarkably different expectations about labor standards, gender equality, and LGBTQ rights. For example, several female returned migrants describe their dismay at the unequal pay, unremunerated long hours, and sexual harassment experienced upon the job. 2 have lost their jobs after making their concerns evident in the workplace. Dreamers in Mexico are responding to these challenges in a variety of ways. Their diverse and determined response defies the limited vision that currently governs policy debates and public discourse about their futures in both countries. Time and time again, the dreamers who have contributed to the making of this book have amazed Nin and I with their resolve and resilience. The majority of the contributors responded to an online questionnaire in which I asked them to tell their story in 4 parts: leaving Mexico, growing up in the U.S., leaving the U.S., and then living in Mexico. The invitation first went out to contacts via my research in Mexico City, the online and offline network of the Otros Dreamers collective, as well as the network of young people who had contacted Dream in Mexico, the organization I mentioned at the beginning. Most of these young people were working in client service call centers, studying in a Mexican university, and or trying to revalidate their studies in the U.S. Once I had received a first draft or enthusiastic interest in writing one, Nin contacted the young people and asked to visit them in order to take photos in their homes and neighborhoods. By reaching out to researchers and community organizers, throughout the summer and fall of 2013, I was able to interview several young people who otherwise may not have been able to connect with the project due to distance, lack of access to the internet, and the rural conditions to which they had returned. The project received a total of 32 testimonios, written and oral. With the paid help of some of the Otros Dreamers themselves, I transcribed through the first drafts and transcriptions. I began to identify the most resonant narrative or phrase in each contribution, based upon the emotional honesty that I felt in their words and the issues that I knew to be common across their experiences after 2 years of field research. I edited each story around that kernel of truth. My edits are limited to cutting text, correcting grammatical typos, reordering text, and on occasion asking the writer to rewrite or expand on a particular topic. I chose not to include 6 of the submitted testimonios because they were incomplete submissions. I remained in contact with all 26 of the Otros Dreamers included in the book, and their words have been printed with their, or will be printed with their consent of the editorial choices I've made. Together, we are telling a story in word and image. This book is the result of a journey across Mexico, along with a quick trip to the United States and back that we'll talk about in a second. Walking into the open doors of dreamers' homes, listening to each other's stories, and looking into each other's eyes. Together, the testimonios and the photos offer multiple voices in multiple registers in order to better understand a life experience that can never be captured by a theory. This book is also an invitation to dreamers to recognize themselves in one another and to stand up ever taller in their truths that are at times painful and always powerful. Returning youth responded to our call to share their stories in numbers I never expected, with a generous and brave sincerity that resonates in their words. In order to share their stories, these contributors overcame the double stigma of undocumented immigration status in the U.S. and deportation or suspicion of deportation in Mexico. This book exists because several of them had already begun to hear one another in the difficult and alienating experience after having grown up in the U.S., and they have made this effort their own. I feel called to walk with the Otros Dreamers in Mexico in order to contribute in my own way to what the poet and philosopher Gloria Anzaldúa describes as a massive uproot of dualistic thinking. I hear in their words the realities that can and are healing the split that originates in the very foundation of our lives, our culture, our languages, our thoughts. Born in Utah and raised in Texas, I've been living in Mexico City for the last 7 years. I love our languages, our peoples, our food, our poetry, and our history. I'm allowed to travel back and forth with my U.S. American passport. I can bring my daughter to visit her grandparents, her aunts and uncles and cousins. I am laying claim to a life rich in friendship, family, learning, and belonging in both Mexico and in the U.S. And if at some point I feel endangered by violence or organized crime in Mexico, I can move back to my U.S. support network. By making this book, I am claiming that I will not rest easy in a world where these youth and their families cannot do the same. I look forward to each of these young people together and in their own way, laying claim to their birthright as transnational citizens. Both the U.S. and Mexican government have a moral and legal obligation to respond to the realities of their young people, to recognize what these bilingual and bicultural youth already live in their hearts, and to at least begin to repair the damage that is being done to their futures, their families, and their communities. May each of these 26 individual testimonios in word and image join together to form a collective song that bears witness to the dreamers' right and potential to thrive, along with their families and communities, in the home of their choosing. Son de aquí y de allá. And with that, I think we'll hear from 3 more testimonios. Thank you.
We are going to listen to Valeria's testimonial read by Naomi.
I'm not happy. I feel like a part of me is dead already. I'm not over it. It's hard to get over something like this. How can you do it? How do you get over things like this? You never do. They can't understand you and never will. They can barely imagine what you went through. They're never going to have to go through it. When I finished high school, I received an invitation for Florida International University, but I couldn't go since my status was illegal. I was working as a manager at a beauty shop when my boyfriend invited me to a Ricky Martin concert in Miami. Once I got to Fort Lauderdale, I was caught by immigration on the bus. When they came on the bus and asked for papers, I said, "I don't have any." I blocked a lot of things that happened that day. I remember I called my mom and she started crying. They took me to the detention center in Miami-Dade. I had to be there for about 2 weeks. It was bad. The first nights, I was crying a lot. I couldn't call my parents. They track all of your calls. The only person I could call was my boss. He said, "There's nothing I can do for you. I wish I could pick you up, but you have to go through the process." In my head, I wanted to die. I was afraid. Then I got transferred to Texas. I didn't have a chance to see anyone. We left our room in the middle of the night. They took me to the airport in the morning. I had handcuffs on my ankles and waist. When we were flying to Texas, half of my face was paralyzed because I was so stressed. When we were in Miami airport, we didn't know anything. They didn't tell us anything at all. "Hurry up, pick up your stuff." We got to the detention center in Texas, and we had to shower for 2 minutes. It was about 6 or 8 girls in the shower. Our clothes got wet. Afterwards, we got a blue uniform, which meant we had no record. There was an orange uniform, which meant you weren't really a criminal, and also red uniforms for real criminals, maybe killing, raping. We were then put in a room, about 100 of us. Most of them were from Asia, Honduras. I was the only Mexican girl. I got sick. I wasn't eating or sleeping. I was so depressed. I'm still depressed. I took a shower and you were exposed. There were no doors. If you had your period, you didn't have privacy. I got a visit from an ICE agent and I asked for my options. I didn't have a criminal record. My file was clean. In this whole process, I never spoke Spanish. I only communicated in English. They had to see I was able to communicate in their language. The ICE agent said, "You're not Mexican." I told him, "I am." He said, "You're not, because you speak English perfectly. Why are you here?" I told him that is the same question I have been asking myself. He said that my options were deportation or voluntary return. I asked what the options meant, and he explained deportation was accepting you are guilty. The voluntary return shows you want to go back to Mexico, and it won't appear on your file. My boss talked to a lawyer for me. The lawyer said it was the best to sign the voluntary return, but make sure you have the agent tell you where they will drop you off, because it'll be in the middle of the night somewhere on the border. I said, "I'm going to sign the voluntary return, but I need to know when I leave and where I will be dropped." He told me that it would be on Wednesday in Nuevo Laredo. It was traumatic. It was crazy. Y no fue el miércoles, fue antes. All these men were yelling. They said, "You'll see what I'm going to do to you once we get on the bus." I had nightmares for, I don't know for how long. One of the ICE officers said to us 2 girls, I'll give you 5 minutes. You can run." As soon as we got off the bus, we ran. It was less than a minute or 2 minutes that I ran, but it was the longest time I have ever ran before. It was in the middle of the night. We ran across the bridge. I didn't look back. We saw a Mexican officer, and I asked the officer if I could stay there. I said as soon as the sun comes up, I'm going to leave. I was there for like an hour when I saw my boss. There are no words to describe how I felt, to show him how grateful I was when I saw him. He asked, "Are you okay? Did they do anything to you?" I said, "I'm okay," and started crying. He said, "I had to pick you up. I wasn't going to leave you." Finally, I was with a person I trusted and knew. In the morning, he took me to the airport, and I flew to Mexico City. Nobody expected me here. Later, I was told I have a 10-year ban. The ICE agent lied. If he had told me it was a 10-year ban, I wouldn't have accepted it. Since I've been here in Mexico, I'm afraid to make plans. I'm afraid I'll have to leave everything again. Even though I'm in my country, I'm with my people, I decided to go with an UNAM because it was a chance to prove to the U.S. government that I can make a life here or there. I'm proud of myself. I have to prove I'm able to do it.
Our next testimonial is Luis Manuel. It's going to be read by Martin.
We left Mexico when I was around 9 months old. We lived in Arizona for about 8 years. I remember I always playing with my neighbors and going to the park and had a lake and a lot of huge dragonflies. That had a lot of huge dragonflies. Then in the year 2000, we moved to Denver, Colorado, my true hometown. My childhood in Colorado was very short-lived. When I turned 11, I started to pretty much do and think as an adult. It was funny how we think when we were kids. I would work with my dad cutting grass. Then I worked at Burger King for 4 years and a half. I was the overnight supervisor. After, I worked in Park Meadows Mall about 7 months. Then, for about 9 months, I started to install carpet. When I was 15, I met my ex-wife at Burger King. We had a beautiful son. When I was 16 and she was 17. By the time I was 17, I had my own apartment, a 2003 Tahoe, and my happy family, and a great job. All that disappeared on May 20, 2011, when I went to jail. I was in jail for 2 days. My bond was $50,000. My parents bought me out, but in the process, they put the house down for $5,000. When I got out, my ex-wife, my son, and I spent on the night at my mother's floor, and I had hit rock bottom. I was charged with distribution of discipline. The next day, which was a Saturday morning, I woke up, went to the bathroom, and 5 minutes later, my ex-wife knocks at the bathroom door and tells me, "I say James are inside, and they want to talk to you." At first, I thought she was just playing around, but then she said it was serious. I got out of the bathroom, and that very second, an ICE agent comes out of the closet that I was in the right bathroom and grabs me and just puts me on the ground, then picks me up and then takes me upstairs. I was only in boxers. I froze, processing everything that was going at the moment. My mom begged the agent to put me in some clothes because it was very cold outside. They let me put on a shirt and some pants. I walked over my ex and hugged her. Then I picked my son. I hugged him really hard. I hugged him again. Then I walked over to my mom and gave her a hug and a kiss. I was going to walk over my brothers and sisters, but the agents grabbed me and then cuffed me. I did not say goodbye to my dad. He did not want to see me. I wish I could hug my dad that day, but I understand why. They looked me towards the front of the door. Then, out of nowhere, I was pushing back and I started to cry, like I never cried before. More like screams, tears. I was shaking a lot. I guess when I felt very nervous and very emotional, I started bleeding from my nose. So my shirt, pants, and my mother's clothes was bloody, very bloody. Then they opened the door and the Chevy Suburban put me inside and tied my legs in chains. This is the hardest part for me to write about. I spent 3 weeks in immigration and then got deported. At that time, I did not have any money because I had just done paying for my lawyer and my dad. I got deported on the first day of April, and I remember seeing my last sunrise in Colorado while I was on the bus waiting to board the plane. The windows on the bus were bare. While I was waiting for the plane, the sun went from beautiful purple to a bright yellow surrounded by beautiful clouds. The minute the plane took off, I saw the last of Colorado, my true home. We landed in McAllen, Texas, and got onto the bus and drive us across the border. Then we we got into Mexico, and we arrived to Matamoros, Tamaulipas. The government helped us to get into Central Bus Station. I arrived in Mexico with $30. Then I called my parents for help. They told me to stay right there, and at the Central Bus, so I spent the night there. I slept for a couple hours on the seats. Then, the next day, my dad sent me $100. I used about 60 of those dollars to go to my parents' ranch in Guanajuato. It took about 36 hours to get there on bus. When I got here, I was 19, and I was denied many jobs because they could tell I was not from here and that I was American. Luckily, I found a great opportunity in León, Guanajuato at the call center. I thank them for giving me the chance to show that I am a hard worker. Just a few weeks later, my older brother arrived. He came here to be with me. I am very thankful to have a brother like him. I miss my other two brothers that are younger than me, and my beautiful twin sisters that I named. And almost all of my parents, excuse me, and most all my parents, and the one that hurts my heart the most, my son. I wish to go back to the United States of America just to visit my family and son. This is my man from Guanajuato.
Now we are going to listen to Claudia's testimonio read by me.
On Thursday, July 18, 2013, after lunch while I was getting ready to go to school to continue my industrial engineering studies, which had been my passion for the last year, I received a call that would change my life forever. It was one from the National Immigrant Youth Alliance. In the last few months, in a desperate attempt to get back to the U.S., I've been sending out my story to a lot of people on social media, and one day it reached Mo. I left Mexico in 1988, a year after my father's death. My dad was assassinated in April of 1987 in a small town in Durango while we were on Easter vacation. My mom received many threats from the people that had killed my dad. The authorities didn't do anything. There was never any justice in his case, and my mom feared something would happen to her daughters, so she decided to leave Mexico. I was around 12 years old. I remember in the beginning I was sad because I left my friends in Mexico. My biggest dream was to make it to college one day. I met my husband in Wichita, Kansas. We got married in 1998, and my son was born there in January of 2000. In April 2005, my husband was going to work, and I was going to drop off my son at school. When I returned home, I received a call telling me my husband had been detained by the police, and they gave me an address to some offices downtown. I never imagined the nightmare. Right there, they arrested and detained me. I didn't know anything about my husband or what would happen to me. I didn't know what would happen to my son, who was still in school. I paid a fine, and I was released a couple of days later. But my husband's case was harder. He was accused of using a fake social security number. In 2006, when the judge deported my husband, with the only charge of using a fake social security number, my world came tumbling down. I moved back to Mexico with my son. A lot of our family and friends turned their back on us. They thought my husband was a criminal, including his own family. We came to Torreon because a family of mine offered us her home. My husband had a hard time finding a job because people over 35 aren't that easily hired. As for me, English opened doors. I studied and obtained an English teaching certificate. My son was 6 when he arrived. I had to take him to a language therapist because he was confused with English and Spanish, and the teachers didn't understand him or help him. A bit later, he fell into a depression, and we had to go to therapy. My son has been a victim of bullying at school, from physical to physiological abuse by his classmates, and sometimes even his teachers. Since he didn't speak Spanish, the kids made fun of him and called him otro, gringo, etc. Last year, we were victims of violence and our car was stolen. From then on, it's been very hard. We can barely make a humble living. I am studying industrial engineering. I'll probably have to drop out since my son is growing up. There are some days I feel very empty. It feels as if my past didn't exist. It's as if everything was a dream. And if I get a glimpse of the future, it's empty. I still struggle to adapt. But I cannot stop thinking that one day I'll return to the USA. I feel that life is passing me by, that it's slipping through my fingers. Whatever happens, I will not stop fighting, here or in the US, so that my son can have opportunities I haven't had. I love Mexico. It's a beautiful country, but I cannot be happy here. My life, my achievements, my family are in the US. My dreams were left back there. Mo, in his brazen manner, invited me to participate in an action that consisted in returning to the U.S. and asking President Obama for a humanitarian visa. It was an action that considered civil disobedience, a challenge to the American government. We knew what we were getting into, that it was legal as well as the consequences that it could have. Even after the phone call, I left for class hoping that maybe school, my dreams, and my uncomfortable routine in Mexico would land me back on my feet. During class, uncertainty tumbled around my head. But never fear. I left school late and spoke to my husband. In the beginning, he had his doubts. But being the great husband that he is, he decided to support me after seeing how sure I was. The next day, I called Mo early to confirm that I'd be joining the group. We reached the conclusion that it'd be better to take my son with me. My son, the intelligent and sensitive person that he is, listened to me carefully when I talked to him. He did not want to leave his daddy. Since we have always been close. Three of us always together, but with the idea of going back home, of traveling with his mom, with the hope of getting back to the life he'd had as a small child. The life that had been taken away from him. He accepted the challenge excitedly. The next day we made it to Nogales, Sonora. Little by little, during the process, I became convinced that what my son was experiencing with me was a blessing, a life experience that he would never forget, even if he didn't have to ever experience it. Even though many pointed fingers at me because of my age, which disqualifies me from being the dreamer legislation that is being proposed in the Senate, I am a dreamer. I am proudly born in Mexico but raised in the U.S. And I am proud of this weird and new culture that is now raising its voice. We have been the little Frankensteins of the broken system. They made us believe during our school years that we were special, with the same rights as everyone else, no matter our race, color, or nationality. When we finally made it to the bridge to ask the American authorities to let us through, we began to hear all the support from the other side of the border in Nogales, Arizona. It's something I can't describe. It's a pure energy that only we as human beings can feel and make others feel when there is certainty and solidarity. I felt true love between strangers, when you are used to indifference and the lack of love between strangers. It was the most wonderful experience that I have gone through, and I will never regret having lived it.
Liz. And now we're going to listen to Nin Solís, all these powerful stories, the 26 testimonies included in the project Los Otros Dreamers, had been accompanied by the pictures taken by Nin Solís. They travel, both Jill and Nin, around Mexico, not only talking to these young people, but also taking images of their own and the places and the spaces where they are living now. So, Nin, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I want to start with this quote of Sibylle Bergermann, a German photographer. It's in the fringes of the world that interest me, not its center. The non-interchangeable is my concern. When there is something in faces or landscapes that doesn't quite fit. She died just 3 years ago, and yeah, I really like this quote. And also with this photograph of Annette Helm, another contemporary German photographer. It is called First Picture for a Show, and this is an acorn that Annette Kelm found by chance on a street in Hamburg. And when I look at such a photograph, my brain tends to compensate for the absence of any identifiable context by immediately waving new stories. For example, I don't know, I can imagine that this acorn could be a spaceship stranded in the desert. And I like very much these photographs of her because they are like a set of tools for visual production that allow interaction and generate room for thought. Okay, so no, I will stay here. With this series, I try to tell a parallel story to the testimonios. A story according to the context that all these young people let me observe and the time that they shared with me. The testimonials generally start at the moment in the past and they approach the present. And I tried in these photographs to capture the present and some traces of the past and some fantasies or ideas of a possible future. The circumstances influence each visit. Some of the journeys I did with Jill, some others I did alone. Some of the people, like Pamela, prefer not to meet at home. And I lived with some others like Azul or Samantha or Sandy or Nancy for almost a week. It was a long time. So I want to start with Pamela. We met Pamela in a small city close to Morelia in the state of Michoacán. Michoacán is one of the most violent states in Mexico at the moment. It was, quite weird there because we needed to be careful there. And I'm sorry. Okay. And we met Pamela at the university. She selected to study there, and she can't do it because this university was built to spend the bicentennial budget. So it's a kind of lost university in the middle of nowhere. But from this small city comes from the family of Pamela, so she can study there. And this is Azul, one of my favorite photographs I think I did there in Merida. This lime belongs to the only tree that survived at Azul's grandmother's garden, a very important memory of her. After being deported, she's living in this house that belonged to her grandmother. And so we did this photograph there in this. Azul was remembering that all this floor was pasto? Grass. But not anymore. And in addition, she's a Mormon, and she invited me to go with her to the church building. And as a feminist Mormon, she has critiques on her religion, but it has also been her most important support after deportation. So for me, this photograph evokes this tension between her thoughts on the religion. And this is Samantha. Samantha decided to come back to Mexico to be able to continue her education. And I heard from her that with love and passion, she started to buy all these decorations that you see in this picture a year before the journey, thinking ahead about the conditions of her new home in Tijuana. This is Benito. Benito again, and Samantha calling to the States to speak with her parents. And this is Tijuana. She showed me the downtown. And this is Nancy. We will speak with her later. Nancy invited me to sleep in her tiny dorm room in London after I had already stayed with her for 3 days in Tijuana. This photo shows her in the process of moving another time. So because we met a couple of days before she left, and showed me the border and her favorite places in Tijuana. And she showed me this statue of Abraham Lincoln in shock that he was in Tijuana. So that's why I took this picture. And these birds are migrating like Nancy to London. And here is Nancy in London, studying global migration. And about Miguel, I really like this photograph because it could be also a spaceship. And a lot of Otros Dreamers, when they arrived in Mexico, they were thinking like, what is that? Because this is a tinaco, and here in the United States there is not such a thing to contain water. So I really like this photograph. And this is the neighborhood of Miguel. He doesn't spend a lot of time in the house, so we were on the street. This is Miguel. And this is in Nogales. This is Edgar. Edgar taught us his story and opened the doors of his home in a dangerous part of Nogales, and without even knowing us. It was amazing how open he was to us, to the interview, to the photograph. And Adriana. This was the third time that we met in Mexico City, and Adriana led us into his transgender life. We walked around the centro dressed as women, and she was much more feminine than me, of course. And during our walk, she talked to me about her idea of being a heterosexual woman that does not identify herself in the Mexican gay scene. And it was very shocking for me. And very... And Claudia, we just heard her testimonial. I visited her in Wichita. And she just moved to this apartment, so it was very empty. And she showed me this folder, and I was very shocked because it was the symbol in the detention center, the symbol of the legal help that she received at this moment. So when this is difficult to explain, maybe you can help.
Well, Nin told me this story that Claudia told her how in the detention center they had each person of the Dream 9 who was detained had a stack of papers like that they entered the detention center that was their legal case to ask for humanitarian parole and later asylum. And as they were handcuffed in the detention center, so the guards had to carry these huge stacks everywhere they went with them, and it became sort of this symbol of really the support they had and the reality, you know.
And I love this photograph, that's why. Not because of photograph, because of meaning. And Rufino, Rufino invited us to eat with his parents in Chamula. He lived with him after returning. I will say it again. I'm sorry. Rufino invited us to eat with his parents, with whom he lives after returning to Chamula, Chiapas, after having lived in Cairo, Georgia, for 15 years. It was pretty amazing because the Tzotzil people do not like to be photographed, but the family of Rufino had no problem when I took this photograph of the spaces. And they were very open about. And this tree is so old as Rufino. It was planted when he was born. That's why it's another symbol. And here at the corner is Rufino's wife. And I know now that she was, at the moment she was pregnant. And they just received, how do you say that? The baby.
Had the baby.
The baby born. Maybe these are the shoots of Rufino, I don't know. But yeah. Okay, and in each case, more than look for a reality or a truth, I look for something poetic where the dignity of the Otros Dreamers was always present. I also tried to take some photos that will work like a room for thought and give the spectators the last word. As an architect, trying to observe spaces, a portrait was not sufficient for me. I think that the places where we live, where we sleep, where we play, they are also portraits, perhaps a more expressive and complete one. And I asked them, in every case, to look directly at the camera lens so that the spectator and reader of the book would become the subject being read. For me, it was very important to achieve a balance between the poetic and ambiguity and the visibility of this generation of young people. Okay, and now I will talk about a bit the proposed layout, because we have started this phase with the designers. So the book will look like something like this. We will start with this quote: each testimonio and the portrait will come to the end, and after each series of photos and the testimonio. The size of the book allows us to use the paper economically in order to print photos and text in a kind of balanced way, in a way that is also portable. We imagine someone reading this on the Mexico City metro or even a plane. And for the about the typography, we are working with two Mexican designers, David Kimura and Gabriela Varela, and they decided to use a font called Espinosa Nova, that it's a revival based on the types used by Antonio de Espinosa, the most important Mexican printer of the 16th century, and very probably the first punch cutter anywhere in the American continent. And this font was designed by Cristóbal Genestrosa with the contribution of these both designers that are working with us. And they choose it because it's a Mexican font and that could be freely downloaded. And at the very end, the translations at the end of the book will be printed on green paper with blue ink, highlighting the similarities and differences in the colors of the national flags of Mexico and the United States. The blue and green are the differences in our flags, the other colors we share. And these are the links. You can pre-order the book online for a donation of $20 that will support the book and the organization Dream in Mexico. And if you like us in Facebook, you will get the latest news. These are the links, our Facebook and a Facebook group of Los Otros Dreamers. The last one is the store where you can buy the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nin Solís. We all want to see the book, to have it in our hands already. When is it going to be ready?
In August. We're planning to print in August.
Okay, wait for it. And now it's with great pleasure that I'm going to welcome our next speaker, Nancy Landa. Nancy is a CSUN graduate student. She came to the U.S. when she was 9 years old, and she was deported to Mexico in 2009 when she was 29 years old. She has been a very successful student, professional, and person that there to start a new life, not only once when she came to the U.S., twice when she went back to Mexico, but a third time around when she decided to go to London to study her master's in global migration. Nancy started a blog, mundocitizen.com, and in that place she writes about her experiences. She shares her thoughts, and she started a countdown on when is she going to be eligible to reapply for a visa to come back to the U.S. That's going to be September 2019. But meanwhile, we have her here, thanks to technology. And welcome, Nancy Landa. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, first of all, before I read my testimonial, I just wanted to say that it's such a pleasure to be back at Cal State Northridge. I have not been there since 5 years ago, since 2009, since my deportation. But I'll begin with reading a part of my story that's featured on the Otros Dreamers book.
I will never forget what deportation felt like. Arriving alone in Tijuana the same day I was detained, having no more than 4 weeks of coping with resettlement before my parents and younger brother were also detained and deported. It was life-shattering. The first week after my arrival, I lived in a neighborhood that reminded me of the one I grew up as a child in the state of Mexico. It was a rundown, poverty-stricken colonia where it was hard to feel safe. With the help of friends that raised funds to help me through that transition, and that came to Tijuana to bring me the essentials, such as clothing and household items, I was able to improve my life conditions. Within a month, I moved to a more comfortable apartment, and it almost seemed like there was hope that I could soon begin to process to restart my life. Within days after I had settled in my new apartment, I received a message from one of my friends notifying me that my family had also been detained by ICE. 4 holiday seasons have passed since a family of 4 was displaced without a place that we could call home, and with the challenges of restarting our lives in a country so different from what we knew. In the first couple of years after my arrival, I wanted to return. I was homesick, and I was not finding a way to cope with living in a city and a country that seemed so foreign to me. Deja vu. But then again, I embraced reality. Hoping for a return would only lead me to be more disappointed. I would not choose to return to the U.S. as an undocumented immigrant. I had lived in the shadows for too long to return to a life of indefinite legal uncertainty. However, there was one thing I do wish for, that I could have a 10-year ban to re-enter the U.S. listed so I'm able to obtain a visitor's visa. Lacking a criminal history, this ban is a harsh punishment as it continues to limit my career opportunities even here in Mexico, or there in Mexico. After a deportation, the first hurdle to overcome was the government bureaucracy. It took me 6 months before we could all obtain a required government-issued documents. This included the passport, the high school revalidation, the federal identification called IFE, which is a requirement for almost every transaction, from signing an apartment lease to applying for work. Thankfully, our friends with family in Tijuana assisted us with the immediate necessities during the period of bureaucratic limbo. Finding work was the second challenge. Despite having an established career in philanthropy and community development in the U.S., I quickly learned that my experience was irrelevant in a border town driven primarily by the manufacturing industry. I was on my own. On the flip side, being bilingual, although not completely fluent in my mother tongue, served as an advantage. However, the best job I could get an offer for was answering phones for a call center. So much for my business degree and experience working abroad. I was not in a position to be picky with work opportunities, especially my parents had a harder time finding work because of discrimination against people over 35 years of age. The third challenge was continuing my education. I forced myself to be hopeful in the midst of the turmoil that became restarting a life from ground zero. I outreached to all the major universities in Tijuana to inquire about graduate school. And after my fourth conversation with a university representative, I realized that having finished a college degree outside of Mexico posed a problem. My U.S. degree would not be fully recognized by the federal education entity, Secretaría de Educación Pública. This meant that all the years invested in education abroad did not amount to a valid degree in Mexico. I would need to take a significant number of courses to obtain a licenciatura in Mexico. Graduate school seemed light years away. But then I began to ask myself, what if I study abroad? When I received my acceptance letter this past March from University College London, there was no turning back. I quit my job so I could focus on finding ways to finance my degree in global migration studies. It was a huge risk to take, but I had to be 100% committed. So I'm in the process of redefining myself and my relationship to the world. It no longer serves me to define myself as Mexican, American, undocumented, or deported. I prefer to see myself as a citizen of the world. And this is something that's bigger than my own dreams and my own personal experience. Thank you.
Nancy, do you want to add some comments after reading your testimonial?
Yeah, I mean, just the first thing, I know I can't see the audience, but there's probably people that I know that I were my friends during the time I was in Northridge. It was actually about 10 years ago exactly that I was getting ready to graduate from Cal State Northridge. And who knows when I'll be able to physically return, but at least I know that there's no borders in the internet as in comparison in the physical world. I mean, it's been such an amazing experience since a year ago since I decided to share my story publicly. I mean, one thing that I think happens with a lot of us and sharing our testimonials with each other, many of us do feel that stigma. It took me 4 years before I came out public about my story. I wouldn't tell people in Mexico that I went through a deportation because of what that label meant. But things changed when I decided to write a letter to President Obama, and this is when he announced deferred action back in 2012, because I felt conflicted. It was great for the Dreamers that were still in the U.S., but I asked myself, why did he wait 3 years? And it took, and more people like myself have been dealing with the consequences of lack of action from his part. And so since then, things have evolved in a way that I never imagined, from being included in Eileen's book, Dreamers, that came out last year. We started doing presentations throughout Mexico, including in Tijuana last year in May. It was the first time I came out publicly in Mexico talking about my experience of deportation. And after in Nuevo Sol, Cal State Northridge decided to pick up the letter I sent to President Obama, because I sent it publicly, like I published that. And Nuevo Sol was the first newspaper outlet that decided to feature my story. And from there, other people were interested in hearing about that experience, and I realized that there were more people like me in Mexico. I had not connected with many people with that experience. I was pretty much isolated with my parents and my brother. But after that, I've been able to connect with Dream in Mexico, with Otros Dreamers, with Jill and Nin, and this is when I decided to share my story to also be included in this project, because I feel that we need to continue the visibility. Part of the Dreamer movement, I think, now has a second arm to it, and I think in Mexico, we're also a part of that. You know, we want immigration reform to happen, but I think our fight in Mexico also deals with being able to provide people an option to restart their lives in Mexico and any other place outside the U.S. in case they can come back. And I mean, it becomes more important because deportations continue to happen. Immigration reform is not here, and we can't have these situations of people not being able to resort to some help. I feel like I've been lucky. I mean, I'm in London studying a graduate degree, but I don't feel my story really reflects the general experience of most people. Most people don't have the support I was able to have when I was in Mexico, and the help I gotten was in Mexico and in the U.S. You know, and so I really was able to get transnational support to be where I am today. So if it wasn't for the help of everyone, and including my friends from the States, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And this is the reason why I'm here, to be able to share my stories along with the collective experience of others.
Nancy, we have been talking about Dreamers and Other Dreamers as a binational experience. But now that you had the chance to go to London, maybe you are taking a look at this from a different perspective. Can you share a little bit of that, how traveling to abroad maybe has, and maybe sharing your story with other people and listening to other stories has changed the way you see deportation and dreamer subject?
I'm sorry, I think I missed the first part because of the connection.
Oh, yes, I was mentioning that we have been talking about this as a binational matter, but now you are abroad and you maybe have a different point of view from your now international experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to kind of see what happens here in Europe, because I believe the struggle for belonging, recognition, and human rights, it's an international problem. And actually here in the UK, I was pretty surprised that the anti-immigrant movement and public denunciation of migrants is very outright, and there's not a movement here. There's no Dreamer movement in the UK and Europe, because here it's more criminalized by European Union countries. And also, I mean, I was learning that there's a return directive, so actually the European Parliament endorsed legislation to be able to return people and kick them out of the European Union. And so obviously it reflects a lot of what is happening in the States in a different way, but I feel here there's not the same solidarity. So I believe it's an international struggle, and I believe that something needs to happen so the movement can become transnational, because I think many of the issues that we've seen with Dreamers in the U.S. and in Mexico are very similar to what we see, what I've seen here in the past months I've been here.
Thank you so much. So now I think we have a little time to go to Q&A. If anyone wants to ask anything to our panelists. Hi, so the first one over there.
Yes, to Nancy, with the transnational experience that you have now, Nancy, is there a plan to, whenever you can relocate, to consider United States as your operation base for this important work that you are yes. Stand up.
We can repeat the question.
Okay, did you hear, Nancy?
I heard part of it, the beginning of the transnational.
Yeah, that with your transnational, with the transnational experience that you have now, whenever you are ready to relocate and start working on the important issue that you are sharing with us, are you considering to relocate in the United States or other places in the world? Obviously, because it's a global issue, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel that wherever I'm at, I will be committed to working on this. I know right now things are starting to pick up in Mexico with the work with Los Otros Dreamers and the work of bringing visibility of our stories with the book. And also as an organization, we're looking at formalizing our efforts, not only with Dream in Mexico, but other collaborations grow the movement. So I think wherever I'm at, I'll be able to continue to support that. I don't think too much about the U.S. because as you see on my blog, I have my countdown, so I still have 5 years where I can apply for anything. So first I have to wait another 5 years and then see if the U.S. government allows me to come back, because it's still at their discretion to never let me return legally. So I have to be able to figure out ways to do that wherever I'm at. But I will be leaving London in a couple of months. I return to Mexico City at the end of June to work on my dissertation, which will be on return migration, to continue the work that Jill has been working with the network to give more visibility to return migration and the experiences of that.
Thank you. We have a question.
Hi, Nancy. So from the testimonials that I've heard today and other sources, it seems like the people that are deported, young people and children, face the same type of discrimination as they do when they're new to the United States. Have you faced any type of discrimination, or how do you think that it's true? Like, they're discriminated here, they're not welcome in Mexico?
Yeah, I anticipated that, and the first advice I was told when I arrived at Tijuana was, do not tell people you've been deported, because I think there's that understanding that a deportation means that you are in the realm of criminality for whatever reason, and I think that's a lack of understanding also in Mexico as to what our experience was in the United States and what led us to return through a deportation. And so part of the reason why I never really told people about my status was to really avoid that. But institutionally, like when I would go and get my identification or my paperwork, you can tell most people understand that, that's kind of like your situation, and you do feel like there's some type of exclusion in terms of the way they treat you when you try to sort your life out once, you return through that needs. And especially because we return without having anything, any documents. So yeah, and besides that, just the way you speak, my Spanish is not, it's my mother tongue, but I'm not fluent as someone that grew up in Mexico, so people usually don't think I'm Mexican, and so I always get that question, like, where are you from, like, where, so it's always trying to, figure out how I belong as a Mexican American in Mexico, even though, I'm not American, but because of citizenship or legalities, but culturally I am, and so trying to, embrace my nationalities, but it's a struggle in Mexico.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At a personal level, how has this whole experiences of living in the U.S. and then now in Mexico and then now in London, how has it made you grow as a person? Do you feel like a sense of invincibility? Is that the correct way? Personally, how do you feel now?
Well, I think more than anything, I felt that after I came out publicly with my story, that there's a lot of people that sympathize and understand the struggles, and I feel that now there's a growing sense of community, especially when I started to get involved with those Otros Dreamers and what we're doing here. I feel that there is that sense of empowerment, that you're not alone, and I think many of the dreamers in the U.S. understand what that feels like with the movement that's been going for over the past 10 years. I remember 10 years ago when I was at Northridge, many people did not know I was undocumented, and I felt that I dealt with those struggles by myself. And so I think, reflecting on how I feel now, I feel that, whatever stigma or attacks I might get, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people that understand my experience because they went through the same thing. And Jill mentioned, there's at least 500,000 of us in Mexico, and we still need to be able to outreach and connect and mobilize, that set of feeling marginalized.
Any other questions for Jill or Nin? Okay, so Nancy, I don't know if you want to share any. Oh, okay, we have another question.
Okay. This is just a general question. So when people are deported back to Mexico, do they have the same legal status as a Mexican citizen, and do they have the same benefits as other Mexicans, or are they, I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, they're Mexican citizens, but of course as part of they, as Nancy mentioned, they need the official state documentation, which is the IFE. Sometimes people who are deported from one day to the next, and especially without any sort of transnational support network, either in the U.S. or Mexico, they don't have a birth certificate to prove who they are, and they can even be suspected of being Central American or being until they can have those documents. So, and also rebuilding a life to get employment, to apply to a university, to rent someplace to live, you need those documents in Mexico. So legally, they're legal, but without those documents, they can't function as legal citizens in Mexico. And it can take months up to, I've heard up to 6 months to get the IFE documents, and some people have, after years of trying, have not been able to revalidate their education documents.
Last question. So, do the people that are deported, the Dreamers, do they have a choice as to where they're? If they have family like in Chihuahua, or do they have a choice as to where they can go back to, or are they just sent to like a random city?
It really depends. There's people who are removed by the U.S. government with deportation are dropped off. Unfortunately, many times it's the middle of the night, which is mind-boggling on the border. Those who sign a voluntary departure usually have 60 to 90 days to leave the country, and so they leave on an airplane or a bus and can go where they enter across at the border at any point, right? Depending. And then there are several who make the decision to return and plan and return on an airplane or return on a bus, knowing that they have no idea when they will be able to cross the border again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
May I just add, in the case of those that are dropped off in the border, the Mexican government offers to pay half of the bus tickets to any place they want to go. They have family or relatives or whatever, and they offer one phone call over the computer. And that's all the Mexican government help is offering right now for people who are deported anytime, any place in the border. Half a bus ticket and one phone call.
And the ride to the bus station.
And the regular bus station, yeah? See? Anyway, we're going to have another question over there. Mm-hmm. Yes?
This question is for Nancy. Nancy, what advice do you have for current dreamers who are want to go to school or are in school, who are on the verge of giving up?
Well, I think if there's anything I can say, it's probably the same thing that one attorney told me when I find out that my case was closed and I was again subject to deportation. And he said, think about an option of relocating, back in Mexico. And I know sometimes we are very idealistic about immigration reform and what that can do for for dreamers to be able to stay in the States, but I think there's also that plan B, and the fact now that we're working on being able to connect with people in Mexico so people can actually have more of a say or more of a plan of relocation if that needed to be the case. So that's one thing I can say as that, because I want to be optimistic about immigration reform, but again, I was like that for 20 years. In the U.S. and that never came. The immigration came to pick me up first. So I think we always need to think about alternatives. And now we hear more stories about other dreamers that leave the U.S. to pursue graduate school or additional studies in Europe and other places. So I think that sometimes it's very easy to feel limited to the U.S. and I think there's more options outside of the U.S. And I know it's hard because we create our homes, our families are there, For some, that's not an option, but I think that we need to be realistic as to how to prepare for something like that.
Last question over there.
This question is also for Nancy. You said that while you were at CSUN, a lot of people didn't know about your undocumented status. Do you share your information more in London, and have you faced any backlash or any discrimination?
I do. Like, actually, one thing that happened during my orientation and my program, when we did our introduction to, because my program is quite small, I think there's about 15 of us. I introduced myself, and I usually say my name is Nancy, and I'm a deportee coming from Mexico. So I kind of like have opened up a little bit of the deportee identity, because I mean that's the reason why I'm here, to study that and get a broader perspective of the experience of migration. I haven't felt discriminated, but I think even for people that study migration, sometimes they are more comfortable reading about migrants and academic literature rather than talking to one and about, and asking you about what it is to be detained, what it is to like arrive at the border. I mean, like, I'm amazed that only a handful of people have even cared, and probably not that they don't care, but I mean, I don't know what it is to be on the other side and then hear, well, this person is a deportee, and I think people are taken aback a little bit by that. And even I have met the Commissioner of Human Rights for the European Union. He grew up in California, and so he spoke at our campus, and that's the first thing I said to him. I'm a deportee, and because of what's happening in the U.S., I'm here. I'm here in London to be able to study and do something about that. And I usually get a silent response from most people. But I think for me it's been important to be able to own up to that identity, and once I return to Mexico, I mean, that's kind of like my mission, to continue to be visible.
Wrapping up, Nancy, if you want to give us just some closing remarks.
Well, I can say again that it's good to be back at CSUN, even if it's virtually. I've kind of been reflecting about like where I belong in the world, and I think even though I'm here in London, I'm traveling, and at least I don't have the barriers that I did when I was back in the U.S. I feel like I still haven't found home. Cal State Northridge is my home. I mean, that's the place where I became the person that I am today, or I could evolve more as a leader, because coming into campus, I was still a very shy person, and I can see the audience, and I can see the people that I know that I've interacted during my years there, but just know that it's meant so much to be able to keep in touch with everyone, whether Facebook or Twitter or my blog, and just having that communication at least gives me that link home, and I always carry CSUN with me. So thank you for this opportunity.
I just want to say thank you for everyone who is here, taking time on your Friday afternoon to listen to these stories. That's the point. We're here to listen and then take it out into our lives and see what happens.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.